Gabriel? Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thanks very much, Gabriel, for inviting me to come along and speak to you all. I always enjoy coming and speaking to economic students because I think it's very important that we encourage more people to study economics and work as professional economists. Um, uh, Given that's been my career, I think that economists have an important role in society, and so I have a personal interest in encouraging more people to study economics. I thought rather than really talking about my career path, I thought it might be more interesting and useful if I told you a little bit about the types of work that we do as professional economists, as applied economists at Frontier Economics. I remember when I was at university, I didn't have a very clear idea of what uh, a professional economist might do. I mean, I had a little sense of it, but there is actually a very wide range of things that a professional economist can end up doing. And the work that we do at our company is very broad and diverse. So I just wanted to give you a sense of that. And in fact, the Reserve Bank has done quite a lot of research into trends in people studying economics. And so over the last 30 years, there's been more than a 70% reduction in the number of students enrolled in economics degrees. So that's it's like quite a worrying trend. And there've been a lot of surveys done about of year 12 students and university students about their perception of economics as a career. And one of the things that keeps coming through in these surveys is that students don't have a very good idea of what an economic career might look like. So that's why I'd like to really share with you today the type of work that we do as a company, so that you can have a sense of what a professional economist might do. And remember, the work that we do is not the full set of things that an economist might do. So if you work in other areas of economics, unlike the ones that we work in, you might be doing quite different work as well. So I do have some slides that I'll present to you guys.
Yeah, I see it now.
Right, cool. Okay. So a little bit about our company. We were established in 1999, so we've been operating for more than 25 years. And we have 4 offices, 3 in Australia, 1 in Singapore. So Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, and then Singapore. And someone at our company counted the number of projects that we've done in the time we've been operating as like nearly 4,000 projects in that time. So very, very active over that period of time. And one of the things about our company, well, I'll share with you some examples of the work that we've done, but the work that we've done has been, very high profile projects advising governments at the highest levels in Australia and other countries on some of the most contentious public policy issues, competition matters, litigation cases. So you'd be surprised to know that like a company that has that sort of effect, that sort of influence, we have only about 40 employees in the company, and about 35 of those are economists. The rest are sort of admin people. So the point that I'm trying to convey is that if you're in the right sort of environment, you can, as an economist, have a very big influence on some of the really big public policy issues. So that you'll sort of see that as we sort of go through today. This is a little graphic that summarizes the sort of areas that we work in across our company. So we do a lot of work in the energy sector, all of the regulated infrastructure, utility industries like water and telecommunications, transport. We do a lot of competition and antitrust work. We do a lot of dispute and litigation work. So we work a lot with law firms, advising on very complex litigation matters. We're increasingly doing work in an area called urban economics. So this is um, uh, the integration between the planning and investment in infrastructure in cities and the economics of doing that. And we also do a lot of work in natural resources and the environment. So an example of that is um, in Australia, there's a set of schemes called biodiversity offset schemes. So this is where there's like sort of major sort of development projects that are happening that might destroy some biodiversity as a result of that. The developers are required to offset that sort of negative externality of that, destruction of the biodiversity by developing new biodiversity sites somewhere else. So there's some koala habitat that's destroyed, for example. The developer is required to offset that by creating a new habitat somewhere else. So it's supposed to be a sort of like with like sort of thing. And these schemes, these biodiversity schemes, were often developed by ecologists who didn't really think very carefully about the incentives that some of these schemes might create or how sustainable they might be. So these schemes have existed for some time, but have not worked very well, or some aspects of them need to be improved. So we've advised, like most of the governments in Australia that run these schemes, on improvements to those, how those schemes operate and improvements in the outcomes of those schemes. So that gives you a sort of a sense for the sort of diversity of the work that we do. We just do microeconomics and focus on microeconomics and public policy. We don't do any macroeconomics. There are other consulting firms, commercial consulting firms that do macroeconomics, but we don't do that. Um, we do a lot of quantitative work, a lot of modeling. So examples of that include sort of financial modeling, cost benefit analysis, demand forecasting. We do a lot of statistics and econometrics, and increasingly more sort of spatial mapping and GIS analysis as well. So very complex. So almost all of our staff, our employees, are economists. We do sometimes employ people who have maths backgrounds, pure maths backgrounds, or physics or engineers. And they often also end up studying economics while they're working for us. So that's a sort of an overview of the type of work that we do. I just wanted to give you a few examples. I won't go through all of the examples that I have here. I might share these slides with Gabriel, and you can have a closer look at some of the other projects that I've got in here, which I won't talk about. And on each of these slides, there are little links to some reports that we've done. So you can go and have a look at the reports and get a sense for the type of work that we've done. So let me start with this one. You all remember probably the last general election, federal general election. One of the most contentious issues there was in our transition, that energy transition to net zero. What's the appropriate energy mix for Australia? And for various historical reasons, nuclear was just not considered an appropriate generation technology for Australia. And so because this has essentially been excluded as a possible source of power generation for Australia, it hasn't been modelled by any of the policymakers as a possible option. So we had a look at uh, what the cost of the energy transition is likely to be if we had nuclear as part of the mix. So it wouldn't be the sole source of generation, but it would be like one of the technologies that is included as a source of generation. And there's a Commonwealth agency known as the Australian Energy Market Operator, who develops a plan for the whole energy system in Australia. And so they've modeled a few scenarios of what the energy transition would look like. So what sort of technologies would be used, and what that would cost. And so they produced this thing called an integrated system plan. and that sort of sets out the sort of the roadmap for the energy transition. And there are a couple of scenarios there. So we essentially replicated their modeling, and then we added in into the mix some nuclear generation technology. Nuclear is currently even legislated against, so you can't even like build nuclear even if you wanted to, and it's sort of there's a moratorium on that. But if we found that if there was some limited nuclear generation included, then the cost of the energy transition would be between 25% and 44% cheaper than is currently being forecast by AEMO. So that's a massive saving for the country as a whole. And ultimately, all of these costs are paid for by consumers. So this was a very contentious issue as part of the last general election. The reason we did this, we weren't actually paid. Although we're a commercial firm, we weren't paid to do this work. We did it because we thought it was an important public policy issue that was just being neglected. And so we wanted to start a debate about whether we should seriously consider nuclear as an option for Australia. So that's one example. And if you followed any of the debate about energy policy in the last general election, the costings that underpin that were costings that we did. Another example of a project that we did relatively recently was in 2023, there was a merger that was proposed, or takeover that was proposed by two big overseas companies called Brookfield and EIG, very big institutional investors, and they were proposing to take a really large shareholding in one of the largest energy companies in Australia called Origin Energy. And what was being offered was a share price of $8.91, and the board of Origin Energy was encouraging the shareholders to take that offer. And so, but the largest shareholder in Origin Energy, Australian Super, so it's basically a super fund, they came to us and said, sorry, let me take a step back. So when Brookfield and EIG proposed to do this takeover, they got a valuation expert to value the company, and so they came up with this valuation which underpinned this offer of $8.91. And so Australian Super came to us and said to us, asked us, can we evaluate how good this valuation is? They basically wanted a second opinion on this valuation. So we had to basically pull apart all of the assumptions of this valuation, and our main conclusion was that the independent expert had seriously undervalued that particular company. So in the end, Australian Super not only rejected that takeover bid, they actually blocked it. This was like one of the biggest transactions that would have happened in 2023. And so they blocked that takeover, which meant that the offer was rejected. Now, since then, what's happened is that Origin's share price has increased pretty much in line with what we valued it to be. So it's now like worth over, it's now over $13, trading at over $13. And that has added more than $1 billion in value to the shareholders that rejected the original offer. So that was like another example of like a big project that we worked on relatively recently. Another example of a project that we did recently was for WWF. So we don't just work for companies and governments, we also do work for charities. WWF has for a long time been concerned about native logging. Native logging creates all sorts of quite bad outcomes for economies, and also for destroys a lot of biodiversity as a result. And because native timber generally grows much slower than sort of other commercial timbers, once a site has been cleared, it takes a really long time for it to regenerate. So if there's a lot of biodiversity that relies on that native timber, those trees, it'll take a long time for those ecosystems to regenerate and recover. But the main problem is that one of the big problems that was identified as so there was a big debate about whether native logging should be banned in various states. And one of the big barriers to that happening was a concern that a lot of the communities that are involved were served by these, like where a lot of native timber logging happens. There's a lot of employment tied up with that particular industry. So the question is like, well, if that industry were to disappear, like what would happen to those jobs? And would there be like an economy that could replace that particular economy, or could there be like some kind of transition? So that's what WWF asked us to do. They asked us to do some quantitative analysis and also set out like what a possible transition for this industry might be if we were to if there was a ban on native logging. So we had to first understand like the scale of like the logging industry, and the data was incredibly poor. There are some agencies that collect this information, but turned out the data was like very unreliable. So we had to actually collect this data ourselves, do this geo mapping to understand like the scale of the industry. And then we also had to do these surveys to understand like the labor force and where the labor force was within the supply chain in the industry. And then we had to think about, well, if this industry were to transition away from native logging, like what could be some replacement markets for labor? So that's essentially what that project was. So we set out like a roadmap for a transition away from that. The New South Wales government just last week has made some really major changes to that industry and cited our work as part of those changes. Um, I'll do one more case study. So this was we did a piece of work for Kids Get Money, and they asked us to assess the economic benefits of early financial education. So this is sort of like so it turns out that not many Australians are very financially literate, and a lot of the lack of financial literacy really starts at childhood because there isn't a lot of this taught in schools and so on. So the question is, if we were to improve financial literacy of children, like what sort of economic benefits could that have in terms of like all of these sorts of benefits? So improved physical and health outcomes, avoided hardship schemes, improved productivity, improved mental health outcomes, and so on. So a lot of the work that we do, particularly in the sort of cost benefit type work that we do, involves trying to quantify and monetize the effect of things that are quite difficult to value. So, what is the economic value of improved mental health outcomes? That's like a difficult question, but it's an important question for a lot of public policy questions that government has to grapple with. So that was a piece of work that we did, and we found that there would be like quite material benefits, particularly in terms of improved health outcomes. Because if people can have better financial literacy, they can sort of plan financially better, and that will lead to like better life and health outcomes. So that's just a little flavor of the types of work that we do as applied microeconomists. Um, of course, like as I said before, there are lots of other avenues for an economist. So you can end up working in government, you can end up working in industry, and you can end up working in consultancies that do things other than microeconomics. So, macroeconomics. but hopefully you can see that there's a very broad range of things that an economist, professional economist, can end up doing. So I'll just stop there, and I know Gabriel wants a bit of a discussion to happen, so I'll just pause at that point.
All right. So does anyone have any questions? All right, Jatin?
What's sort of the best thing we can do right now as high school students to set us up for jobs similar to yours in the future?
So I guess if you are interested in a career in economics, obviously study as much economics as you can through high school, and then go and talk to think about the sort of universities that so if you want a career in economics, you do have to go and get an economics degree. And increasingly, we're finding that employers really like the minimum entry requirements for a professional economist are increasing. So it used to be like an undergraduate degree in economics would be enough from a like a decent university. But now the requirement is more, there's so much more sort of competition for these kind of roles that now it's at least like an honors degree in economics is the sort of requirement, and that's probably going to increase as well. So I would encourage you to start thinking early about economics programs that you might be interested in taking. And um, it's a bit difficult, I know, like when you sort of start out at university to know exactly what you're going to end up doing. But the more of a plan that you have for your degree, like the easier it's going to be, like the more structured it is. When I review lots and lots of job applications for our company, and um, it's very easy to tell from like the courses that people have studied, like whether they have sort of planned their degrees well or not. And you can end up wasting a lot of time studying the wrong things at university if you're not careful. So just give it a bit of early thought about the courses that you want to take. Um, the universities have become like very poor at guiding students and helping them prepare for the job market, and they have this a weird incentive to offer lots and lots of like a variety of courses that may not ultimately be that useful. So when I look for potential candidates for jobs at our company, graduate roles, I'm always looking for students who have studied the sort of core economics subjects at university, so microeconomics, macroeconomics, and econometrics. Basically, those three, like all the way through their degree. So if somebody has started out studying microeconomics and then basically in the second year stopped and moved on to other things, then it makes me question like whether they're sort of seriously interested in microeconomics, and they shouldn't probably be applying for a job at our company. But someone who has studied those three subjects all the way through university, their university degree, um, like I would take more seriously, and particularly if they've done well all the way through. So I'd encourage you to study and make those a core part of your degree programs.
All right. Are there any other questions? Raphael?
Yeah. Other than like our academics, what do you think are high leverage experiences or skills that would serve us well in like the economic um area?
Well, that's a very good question, Rafa. I mean, so obviously you've got to do well in your academic performance, so that is important. But I think there are a lot of softer skills that are also very important. If you want to do one of the most important roles of an economist is to try and persuade non-economists. Sometimes you're having to persuade them that the ideas that they have come up with are actually bad ideas. So you have to be a persuasive communicator. So working on your communication skills, written and oral, is very important. So take any opportunities that you can to develop your written and oral skills, your presentation skills. Because if you can be the best economist in the world, but if you can't communicate your ideas effectively, then you're not going to have any impact on decision makers. So that is a very important skill. Related to that is, sorry, when I say written, I'm not sort of joking about that. I find like a lot of university students can't write to save themselves. And it's because I don't blame the students, it's because the university programs don't train them to write well. But if you want to be an effective economist, you need to be able to write well. So practice writing articles, essays. I'm always impressed that there are some graduates that apply to us that, write like uh, articles of interest, like they write blogs or they write papers for magazines or articles for newsletters and things like that on economics topics. So that's like a very good way of developing your written skills. Because you often in university courses these days you don't get trained to write essays. So that's quite important as skills. So take those kind of opportunities. When I'm talking about effective communication, it's not just about communicating the technical um, aspects of your economic analysis. That is important, but you have to be relatable to people. So, basically become fluent in speaking human. Just talk, just more fluent in speaking normally to people, because that makes you more relatable and uh, just makes it easier for people to understand what you're saying. Often you're dealing with people who are not economists. So you have to be able to communicate economic concepts in a way that's accessible and easy for non-economists to understand. So that in itself is a skill that's worth developing. I think those would be sort of the main things that I would encourage you to think about. The sort of softer skills is mostly on the sort of communication side.
Mm. Yeah, I think the points you made there, I think they were quite similar to some of the points that Josh made previously about like communication, importance of communication. So yeah, very helpful. Are there other questions that we have?
So I might just add one more thing to that. Economics is not just like theory in books. Economics is, I think, just a different way of looking at the world around you, of explaining the world around you. Um, I often think to myself, like people who haven't studied economics, they must go through life being like completely confused about the world they live in. Because what economics does is it provides you like this really clear framework to be able to think about what's happening in the world around you. If you think about what economics is, it's really just like the study of human interaction. I always say to the graduates that join us, if you want to be a really good economist, you need to understand two concepts really, really well. And without understanding these two concepts, you can't. It's a necessary condition. It's not a. It's a necessary condition to be a good economist. The first is the concept of opportunity cost. So you need to understand the concept of opportunity cost, because unless you do that, you won't understand what a trade-off is. And economics is all about trade-offs because it's about the allocation of scarce resources. So if you don't understand opportunity cost, you won't be able to understand trade-offs properly. And often, like the big policy mistakes or the big mistakes that people make when they make decisions is not thinking about the trade-offs that exist when they make a particular decision. The second thing you really have to understand is incentives. So we all are conditioned by the environment around us, and the environment creates that we are in creates incentives for us to behave in certain ways. So when the incentives change, behavior often changes as well. And so understanding incentives is really, really important to getting good outcomes in society. So let me give you a little example of that. Governments are often obsessed with tax policy. So what's the best way to like um, tax people in the economy to maximize revenue? Economists are absolutely terrible about thinking about the incentives of taxation policy. So often, economists ignore what's called second order effects. So the government might say, well, we want to raise we want to understand what the effect of raising this type of tax might be. And economists will just say, well, okay, tax rate goes up by this much. These many people are affected by the taxes, and this is the potential revenue. What they don't often think about is the second order effect, which is people might many people might change their behavior in response to an increase in tax. So they might take steps to minimize their tax in a way that is unexpected. And that's often ignored by economists. So you have to really understand if you're going to change something about how the economy works, you need to understand what incentives that might change and how people's behavior might change as a result of that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that economics isn't um, just the stuff that you learn at school or university. It's really a way of understanding the world around you. So you really like once you start studying economics seriously, you start seeing economics everywhere. In almost every interaction that you have with anyone, there is an element of economics because you're dealing with human behavior. So one of the things I encourage you to do is start paying attention to that. The more you start sort of consciously thinking about it, the more you start to realize that really economics is the economy is the sort of world we live in and how the way we interact with each other. It's the best economists that I've ever worked with are those who sort of see economics everywhere. It's a way of looking at the world. So yeah, bear that in mind. I think that's also very important, apart from the communication stuff.
Yeah. Um, I think Jadon has a question.
Yes, I was wondering, if we were looking for internships while in high school, firstly, do you think it's a good idea? And secondly, how do you reckon we go about applying for these internships and job experience?
No, I don't think it's a good idea when you're at high school. I think when you're at high school, you should enjoy your time at school and obviously uh, focus on schoolwork, but also enjoy your time at school because you're never going to get that time back again. It can be like some of the best years of your life, and don't. It's also incredibly difficult to try and get an internship if you're a high school student. You might be able to get like some limited work experience type thing, but an internship is almost impossible because there are so many university students who are competing for internships. There will be a time and a place for internships later when you're at university. Um, we would typically take interns who are in their second or third year at university, but we wouldn't take any interns who are in their first year at university or in high school. We do have sometimes we have like work experience students from high school come in for like a day or two, but it's not a an internship program as such. Our internships, we have different types of internships. We might have like internships that are like 2 or 3 weeks, and then we might have longer internships, like maybe 6 weeks or something like that in the longer university holidays. And you get more out of an internship if it's a relatively long period of time because you can work on a decent project and you can see some outcome to the project. So I wouldn't like worry about trying to do an internship while you're at high school. Just like focus on schoolwork. Do your extracurricular stuff and enjoy your time in high school. And then when you're at university, then start thinking about internships.
Mm. Do we have any other questions? Oh yeah, Raphael.
Yeah, on that note, what do you think differentiates applicants when you're filtering through their like internship applications?
Well, I mean that so work experience doesn't really help because often the work experience isn't that relevant. So it would be mostly academic performance. That would be sort of the main uh, thing that would be. So I'll just this might differ for other employers, but I'll tell you what we do for an internship application. So we will open up our website so you can apply for internships through our website. You have to meet certain criteria in order to qualify for that. But provided you meet those criteria, we'll look at your application, which is usually a cover letter and a CV and academic transcripts. And so this is why we normally like take second and third year students because we can see like how they're doing at university and for at least like a couple of years. Um, we will look at their academic performance, and if they're doing well, then that's a tick. We will look at their CV, although the CV doesn't really tell us like very much information, but it tells you like, how much effort you sort of put into doing a decent CV. Sometimes the CVs are like very generic and the person's made no effort to like tailor it to the company they're applying to. So give some thought to that. Then we'll read the cover letter and if it's well written, then that's another tick. If it's poorly written, then probably not so much. So then we'll shortlist candidates and we'll interview them. And when we talk to the candidates, we're really we'll assess them on how they think through an economics problem. So we might put a little case study to them and ask them to think through how they might answer an economic question related to that case study. And then we'll also just have a conversation with them about what they think about economics or a particular problem. And we're looking at their communication skills and we're looking at the way they not whether they give us the right answer to the case study or the problem, but whether they have a logical, structured way of thinking through the problem. So really, like, are they using economic frameworks properly to answer this question? Yeah, so those are the sorts of things that we'd be looking for in candidates who are applying for internships, and it's also a very similar process for graduates who've finished their economics degrees and are applying for a full-time position. Although the interview process will be more rigorous than that for interns.
All right. Do we have any more questions? Oh, okay, Edson.
Yep. So, when you have clients, how would you like approach the issue? Like, what's your what's your company's like attitude to like your process of like solving problems and like involving like modeling and research and that kind of thing as a consultancy?
Well, it depends a little bit on, sorry, I'm still sharing the screen. Let me just stop that. It really depends on the client and how clearly they have identified what the problem is. So you're right, Edson, that most people come to us, they willingly part with money for our advice because they've got some kind of problem that they can't solve on their own. So they come to us for advice, and they come for specialist economic advice. And often we find that they might think that they have a particular problem, but actually the real problem is something different. So we spend like quite a bit of time talking to them about what the actual issue is to try and diagnose what the problem is that needs to be addressed. So we might have like a government department that comes to us and says, we're concerned about this particular thing, and they've already jumped to a conclusion about what the answer is. But that may be because they have misdiagnosed what the problem is. So we spend a lot of time talking to them about what the underlying problem is. And then it's a question of using economic frameworks and all of the appropriate tools to answer that question in the most effective way possible. So sometimes that might require some modeling, some complex modeling. Sometimes it might not require any modeling at all. It might just involve conceptual thought, just using economic frameworks in a systematic way to think through a particular problem to find what the appropriate solution is. But at the end of the day, all of our clients come to us for some kind of solution. So they will want a report or some advice in some form that answers a particular problem that they're grappling with that they can't answer on their own. So we always keep that in mind, that that's the end goal, that we have to give them some kind of solution that makes their lives better. And that's basically how we work.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question from one of the students. So basically they asked, what publications or like news sources and other things like that that you would recommend for students to, get to better understand the world around them.
From an economic perspective, nothing in particular. So you don't have to, get a subscription to the AFR or anything like that. I mean, if you're interested in reading those kind of publications, then those sorts of news sources, then what that tells me is that you probably already have an aptitude towards or an interest in economic topics. So that's good. But you don't have to restrict yourself to just those types of news sources or publications. Just pay attention to the things that are happening in the world around you. Ask questions about you'll hear things, like politicians talking about certain issues. Don't just take it at face value. Ask a question. Ask what is this issue about? Why is so people there's a lot of debate, for example, about a housing crisis in Australia. What's that about? Like, what's causing that? Is there in fact a housing crisis? I think there is. Um, so if that's the case, well, what is causing that? And question the things that you're hearing, and don't just take things at face value. Always ask, like, what's really going on here? What's the motivation? And what's the evidence for what I'm hearing? So just make that sort of like just a part of the way that you operate, and that natural inquisitiveness will just lead. That's a really important part of being a good economist, being inquisitive about what's going on. because often what's actually going on is not always intuitive, requires a little bit of digging and analysis to work out what's actually going on. So that's a very important skill to develop.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one last question, maybe a little bit more. It's short. I'm sure one of you guys have some questions. Don't be shy.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So how many of you are high school students?
I think all of them are high school students right now.
And all of you are studying economics, is that right? In some way?
Yeah, I think most of them are. I think some of them are currently like in younger years, for example, like some of them in year 10 and the school don't like give them like schools won't let them study economics in year 10. Because it's like a senior year 11, year 12 subject. So
Okay.
yeah, but they're all very interested and they all like learn economics outside of school as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm very pleased uh, that you're taking an interest in economics. Uh, uh, when I think back to when I was a high school student, I enjoyed economics. I studied it because, well, I mean, I don't know why I first like s- um, chose it as a subject. But it sort of became, it was like very easy for me to understand. It was just like very intuitive to me. But I never thought about becoming an economist. I actually wanted to be a scientist rather than an economist. And it was economics was like the subject that I did best in. So I won the school prize, the year equivalent of the year 12, like school prize for that. And it was because it was just like a very intuitive, easy subject for me. But I still didn't really think about studying economics at university. And my economics teacher sat me down and talked me into studying economics at university because I wanted to go off and study science instead. And I'm really glad that he did that. And it's if I had sort of just if the choice had just been mine, I probably would have made the wrong choice. So it was really good to have somebody who provided a bit of like perspective and encouraged me to study economics. So this is one of the reasons I'm like talking to you guys because I'm hoping to encourage you to study economics because we really do need like sensible people who I think like a lot of the public policy mistakes that are made are because people haven't thought through the problem in a very systematic, structured way. And economists can really help do that. Really assess, like in a very uh, like dispassionate way, like what is the sensible approach? Because the role of the economist is really to maximize economic welfare. What does economic welfare mean? It's really like the overall prosperity of the nation. It's overall like one of my friends who's an economist, when he gets asked what he does for a living, he says his job is to maximize happiness. And that's basically like the job of an economist, right?
Mm.
It's to work out like what's the best way to make society as prosperous as possible. And when you have, you can't just do that with like good feels. You've got to do that through like sensible decisions that doesn't waste like the scarce resources that we have. And so the only discipline I think that helps people think through that in a very structured, disciplined way is economics. So that's why I think it's so important that you guys go away and study economics and become good economists who help people make sensible decisions.